morning. Welcome to my channel. I hope you guys are having a wonderful morning. I wanted to continue on this video where I was saying when God speaks, listen. That is what I'm going to call the video. It's uploading right now. And as I was reading more in 1 Samuel chapter 15, we go down further and we're seeing where Samuel had the task of telling Saul that he had been rejected from God. He had been rejected by God. And we see here that we see that Samuel the prophet really had a hard time with this. He was mourning, he was crying for Saul. He didn't want to do this. I imagine he may have formed a connection with him. Maybe he even liked Saul. Maybe he knows about Saul's beginning. He was hoping that Saul would have succeeded. And just overall, he more than likely takes no pleasure in having to bring this bad news to Saul, because it's not a small thing to say the Lord has rejected you and you will no longer be king. And so I want to read this to you, and I want to show you something really quickly. All right, so 1 Samuel chapter 15. I'm going to go down to verse 10, and I'm going to skip around a bit, and then you can read this on your own thoroughly. But the preceding verses, we're seeing where Saul had been given specific instructions by Samuel that he needed to destroy the Amalekites, all of them. He gave him spare no one. But Saul went and he destroyed some of the Amalekites, but kept who he felt was valuable, to include the king and then the best of the livestock. And this was not the only thing that Saul had done wrong, but this was just it for Samuel. This was it with God, because you're going to see what happens next. So in verse 10 it says, "Now the word of the Lord came to Samuel, saying, I greatly regret that I have set up Saul as king, for he has turned back from following me and has not performed my commandments." And it grieved Samuel. So it grieved Samuel to hear this. And he cried out to the Lord all night. So when Samuel rose early in the morning to meet Saul, it was told Samuel, saying, Saul went up to Carmel, and indeed he set up a monument for himself, and he has gone on around, passed by, and gone down to Gilgal. Then Samuel went to Saul, and Saul said to him, Blessed are you of the Lord, I have performed the commandment of the Lord. But Samuel said, What then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? And Saul said, Oh, they brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. And then Samuel said to Saul, Be quiet, and I will tell you what the Lord said to me last night. And he said to him, Speak on. So Samuel said, When you were little in your own eyes, were you not head of the tribes of Israel? And did not the Lord anoint you king over Israel? Now the Lord sent you on a mission and said, Go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they were consumed. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you swoop down on the spoil and do evil in the sight of the Lord? Okay. So Saul said to Samuel, But I have obeyed the voice of the Lord and gone on the mission which the Lord sent me, and brought back Agag, king of the Amalekite, the king of Amalek. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took of the plunder, sheep and oxen, the best of the things which should have been utterly destroyed, to sacrifice to your God in Gilgal. So Samuel said, Has the Lord great delight in burnt offerings? So does the Lord have delight in burnt offering as he does in obedience, right? So this is where it says, it is better to obey than to sacrifice, and to heed, that means to listen, than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as a sin of witchcraft. Okay, it's as a sin, meaning it's just the same. God sees it the same disdain and the same contempt that God has for those who or for the sin of witchcraft. It's the same he has for rebellion. And stubbornness is an iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. Now here's Saul saying to Samuel, then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord in your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. So he's saying, I was more afraid of the people than listening to God. Now therefore, please pardon my sin and return with me, that I may worship the Lord. But Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. And Samuel turned around to go away, and Saul seized the edge of his robe, and it tore. So Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, and has given it to a neighbor of yours who is better than you. And also the strength of Israel will not lie nor relent, for he is not a man that he should not relent. Then he said, this is Saul, I have sinned, yet honor me now, please, before the elders of my people and before Israel, and return with me, that I may worship the Lord your God. So Samuel turned back after Saul, and Saul worshiped the Lord. Okay, so Samuel, he went back with him, and they worshiped the Lord. Then Samuel said, bring Agag, king of the Amalekites, here to me. So that's the king that Saul spared and would not kill. He's the king of the Amalekites. So he brought him there. So Agag came to him cautiously, and Agag said, surely the bitterness of death is past. So he's like, you're not going to kill me, are you? You're not still mad? But Samuel said, as your sword has made women childless, so shall your mother be childless among women. And Samuel hacked Agag to pieces before the Lord in Gilgal. Then Samuel went to Ramah, and Saul went up to his house at Gibeah of Saul. And Samuel went no more to see Saul until the day of his death. Nevertheless, Samuel mourned for Saul, and the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. We go back to the point that I was making in my other video. It's a bit longer. I would encourage you to listen to it. That when God tells you to close a door, you have to close it. Sometimes it's very hard. Sometimes the task that you have at hand is very difficult. Let's talk about Samuel's point of view here. He didn't want to do this. He had a command from God, which was to tell Saul that he was no longer going to be king. And then on top of that, he had to reject him. He had to turn away from him and never see him again. He never saw Saul again until the day Saul died. And Samuel was mourning. He cried all night, the fact that he had to do this. And he mourned for him when he died. He never stopped caring or had a soft spot for Saul. But yet he obeyed God. The lesson to us is Sometimes there are doors that you are going to have to close, that we have to close permanently. Permanently. And it will be so hard to do, but you have to do it. You see here the human side of Samuel, a vulnerable side of Samuel. He didn't want to do this. He's called by God, he's given the words of God. But yet his calling of God even required him to give bad news to those he even favored, honored, or even feared. Here he wasn't afraid. He was crying. He mourned. You know what mourning is? It's like you're crying as if there's a loss. It's different from regular crying or shedding a few tears or being sad. It is a deep, deep grieving to know this is what I have to do. And sometimes you go through that. Sometimes we go through that. The grief, you struggle with this thing that you know that God is telling you have to do, but you don't want to do it for whatever reason, but God has given you that word. And what makes it more difficult, it had to have made it difficult for Samuel. Then Saul begins to cry. He begins to beg him. He cries out to him. He's turning to leave and he pulls on his jacket, pulls on his robe. And I believe he probably fell to his knees. That's why it tore. He probably held on and was just bent down on the ground, or he was already on his knees begging and just pulled it and it ripped. And Saul just continued begging and saying, go with me, pray with me, be with me. And this has to be so difficult. But the first thing that Saul had to do before anything else was to get rid of, they had to destroy the king. So he was like, I'll go to my house. I want to go worship. I'll go do this. You see? Saul worshiped. He was saying, please go back with me so I may worship the Lord your God. And he goes with him to worship. This is like communion, right? They have this time together. And when Saul goes and he's repenting and he is sorry and he goes before God, the other thing he had to do was to release, relinquish, and let go of that thing that caused him to lose the anointing to be king. Okay? So Samuel turned back from Saul, and Saul worshiped the Lord. And Samuel said, okay? No, Samuel turned back after Saul, and Saul worshiped the king. Saul worshiped the Lord, okay? But when he turned back with him, Samuel told him, bring Agag to me. So that's one of the things. You see, sometimes a person could be wanting you to please, 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 but they don't want to give up. They don't want to stop doing what they were doing. They don't want to let go of that thing that they've been holding on to, whether it's an attitude, whether it's a behavior, whether it's a way of life, whether it's the way that they've always been dealing with you. They don't want to stop doing that. They won't do that. They won't let that go. But Saul knew at that moment he had gone too far, and he was repentant at that moment, and he's crying and he's going to Samuel. He's please, please. And he turns and he worships with Saul goes to worship before God, and Samuel then says, bring the king. That thing that has kept you, that thing that you chose over God, bring it here so it can be destroyed. And he does. And the king is destroyed. Samuel utterly destroys the king. And he says to him, as your sword has made women childless, so shall your mother be childless. And after that, Samuel left, and Saul went to his own house. And Samuel went no more to see Saul until the day of his death. He never went back to see him again. Sometimes there are relationships, guys, that when God is telling you to close it, that's it. You're never going to see that person again. You're never going to open up that door again. It's not going to happen, but you may still mourn, and it's okay. It's normal to feel that way. And you can pray and God will give you peace, but when you think of it, you will still have some sadness there. But it doesn't mean you're supposed to go back and open it. It doesn't mean you go back and say, well, let me see. Because a lot of times God sees the heart and he knows the intent of that individual. Because look at this. After all this praying and sacrificing and begging and ripping his jacket, if you read the subsequent chapters, you'll see that Saul now begins to go after David. And he begins to do a lot more wicked and evil things following that. And that's why sometimes God will tell you, let it go. No. Because that person is not changed. That person, excuse me, is upset at what has happened at that moment. That person may be terrified. That person may be genuinely shook about the consequences and what's happening, but it doesn't mean that they are changed. So just something, guys, for y'all to think about and to consider, that when God tells you to let go, you may have a period of mourning. You may have it still now. You may have gone on with life and you're doing certain things, but maybe when you think of this person, there is a longing, there is some mourning, but some relationships you're going to have to close the door. Some it's temporary, some are temporary, because maybe this is a person they can see themselves, they can truly repent before God, they can really be you can really be reconciled to them because they can see the errors of their ways. You both can reconcile to one another, apologize, and it's genuine. And then there's some people, they're never going to change. They're going to be the way that they're going to be. But because you're familiar with them, you want to open that door. I've experienced that. I talked about that in a recent video. And it's hard to do it. Especially if it's, if you have a different type of connection with this person, where we're not talking about boyfriend, girlfriend relationships. You may be related. You grew up together, or you were your siblings. It's you and a parent. It's you and someone that you were raised with them as siblings. A person who was in your life as like a second mother, or like a dad in your life, or a close friend that you've had all your life and you have been through things together. These things are very difficult. But when God says to close it, close it. And understand that it's okay for you to feel the mourning and you to feel like you miss the person and you feel a certain way, but you can't go back. You can't open that door anymore. Someone sent an email that said something. You cannot water dead flowers. You can't open and exhume something. My dear grandmother, I loved her and love her to pieces to this day. She's dead and gone. I can't go to her gravesite and open up her coffin and go in and lay with her and hug her, take her out, because I miss her. She's not there anymore. She's not there. These are whatever's left of her, right? So I can't do that. And that is, in a way, figuratively, what a lot of people are trying to do. You're trying to salvage something. You're trying to water dead flowers, or you're trying to have this relationship that is dead. Or and look, you want to stay with a person because the person starts to cry. When you're trying to close the door, they're crying, they're emotional, they're saying, please don't go, I'm sorry, oh my God, I miss you, please. And they miss you and all of that. And that's the worst ones. That's worse than the ones that just don't care. The ones who are crying and begging you and saying how they're going to change, and they miss you, and they'll call you and blow up your phone and just keep calling you until you answer. No. You have to close that door, and you have to close it forever. And it's not hatred. It's not bitterness. It's not unforgiveness. It's called wisdom. It's called obedience. Because let me tell you, look what Saul did after that. He was running rampant all the way, doing all this evil and wrong, constantly just going and just doing and carrying on and doing stuff. And he had no peace. He was carrying on, but he had his focus on David. He wanted to destroy him. And he kept doing this all the way until the very end, until he was defeated by the Philistines. God brought his greatest fear upon him, which was the Philistines. Destroyed him, and guess who got destroyed in the midst of that? Jonathan, all his sons. Why? They connected to the father. And Jonathan was always good to David. And they were killed, and they were beheaded, and all this stuff happened. So, yes, the mourning is all right. Feeling sad is okay. Because your heart is pure towards them. You don't hate them. But believe me, sometimes those individuals, they don't feel that way. They're not struggling like you're struggling. They're not struggling like we're struggling. Because they don't care. Their heart is dark. And even when they're around you, they're calculating. They're calculating every conversation. They're calculating everything. They're thinking of you, okay, I'm going to say this, but I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say that, but I'm not going to say this. Everything that they're doing, it is already, they're methodically thinking everything out. Whereas you're so happy to see them. You're so happy to be around them. You're just pouring your heart out. You're talking genuinely because you have no holes barred. You're not thinking of them like that. You are genuinely coming to them and being pure, and you're just thinking, we're going to move forward together as a unit. This is it. You have no ill will. But people whose hearts are compartmentalized and divided, they don't love you like that. They don't have that same type of love, the love that forgets everything that was said and done, and they just love you. The love of the father with the prodigal son. The love of God that just genuinely will just pick you up where you're at, and you're going to just start from there. They don't have that. And some may say, well, it's caution. Yeah, you have to take precaution, but it's not about precaution here. It's just that their heart was never with you. It's one thing when you're being taking precaution, but it's another thing when the person's heart was never with you. They still hold bitterness. They're still holding you in contempt. They still are angry with you. They're still trying to figure out how they can get you back. It's a different type of thing. So every conversation is calculated. They're going to try to find spots where they can poke you and try to find areas where they can make a dig at something you're doing. They're going to find moments where they know that something is important. They're going to stay silent on it. They're going to ignore you. They're going to act like they didn't hear something. They're going to say something, take opportunities to give you that thing. To if they see that you're feeling insecure, they're going to talk about it and make you feel even more insecure, but they'll do it in a very subtle kind of way. Okay. I will tell you, there was one situation. I remember I was speaking with someone, and then they just brought up this person from a person I used to go out with, just out of the blue. Just asked me if I've heard from this person. Just out of the blue. It was so left field. Like, huh? Never asked me about anybody before, but they're asking me about this person, asking me if I've heard from them. No. And I walked away from that, but the Lord just placed in my heart, why do you think that they would ask you that question? That was not just a question. There's a reason they asked you that question. The person asked you that question. And then somehow again it was brought up in another way, but then they were bringing up something like they just took this dig at at me, and it was very strange. But it just be that's going to be one of a few things. But the point that I'm making to you all is, it's okay to mourn, it's okay to feel sad, but when God says close the door, close the door. And sometimes it means you're going to close that door forever. Sometimes there's not going to be any returning. But just don't buckle, don't have moment, don't go back, don't open the box. Because if you think about it, every time you've done it, every time you've gone back, every time you've reconciled with that person, every time you've made up, every time you try to start a new relationship, a new friendship with them, think of the level of discomfort you feel. You may feel some happiness there, but you also can feel that wall that's there. And or you're in the relationship and you're making sure you don't do anything to upset them, so you're not even comfortable. Better to mourn and have your peace. Close the door. When God say close the door, close the door. He knows exactly what he's talking about. God bless.